All right, we'll call to order the Ravenna City Council Committee of the Whole meeting at 6 p.m. this evening. The first item on the agenda is the approval of Committee of the Whole meeting minutes of October 24th. Were there any additions or corrections to those? Do we have a motion to accept as submitted?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
The second item on the agenda is an ordinance to accept a $13,800 donation from the Main Street Ravenna for the parking lot trees. This is sponsored by Streets and Sidewalks. Mr. Harper.
Yeah, this is an anonymous donation from an individual who's covering the cost of the trees planted at that parking lot. I believe the project is complete at this point. So it's just accepting the donation.
Mr. Harper, this is not a trick question at all. I'm just curious, though. How many trees does $13,800 get you?
I believe it was 12 trees, roughly 3 inches in diameter.
Oh, it's a pretty big.
We just had that conversation.
Okay.
And I believe it was a dozen trees.
Dozen trees. Okay.
Right, yeah.
They look good.
And they're nice, they look great.
Yeah, 3-inch trees, a pretty
Yeah.
mature tree.
Yeah,
Okay,
pretty
great.
substantial trees.
Is there any questions on that item then? Well, with this, yes to the emergency clause, I'm assuming? Just confirm that.
Yes.
What's the pleasure of the committee?
Ordinance.
Number 3 on the agenda is an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into an agreement with the University of Akron for the water operations and capital project support. This is sponsored by Utilities. Mr. Moskin.
Yes, this deal with a company called Fontis Blue, and through Dr. Miller, he's a consultant. This is a housekeeping thing. It's done every 2 years. The only big change this time is it goes from 2 years to 3 years. So he does the consulting with the water treatment and wastewater departments.
Any questions on this item? We're all in agreement about the emergency clause. What is the pleasure of the committee?
Ordinance.
Next item on the agenda is an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into an agreement with the University of Akron for, this is the same
Same thing.
Same thing.
Just,
Are there 2 contracts, or is this just a type?
well, there's
Okay.
2,
Just wanna
one
make sure.
one for water treatment, one for wastewater.
Water operations and wastewater. I should have read it fully. This one is for wastewater operations. Mr. Moskin, sorry.
Okay. Same thing as what I just mentioned, through Fontis Blue, and it's Dr. Miller. And this time it's through the wastewater treatment department. And this time it's just 3 years instead of 2.
And the same, is there any opposition to the emergency clause on this item? If there's no question, what is the pleasure of the committee?
Ordinance.
Next item on the agenda is an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with the Portage County Public Defender. This is sponsored by Planning. Mr. Karras?
Yeah, this is a yearly contract to pay for indigent people who can't afford their own defense for any kind of infraction they've been accused of. The contract's exactly the same. I read through last year's and this year's. It's $150 an incident, so no changes.
And same thing, same question with the emergency clause?
Yeah, I believe our contract expires at the end of this next month, so,
Okay.
And by law, we have to have it,
yeah.
so.
Just want to check the box. If there's no other questions then, what's the pleasure of the committee?
Ordinance.
Yes.
Next item on the agenda is an ordinance adding 1434.03, Section O, to the codified ordinances to establish a quorum and voting members in attendance for action items. This is also sponsored by Planning, Mr.
Yeah,
Pierce.
so at our committee meeting, the issue came up, there was some suggested changes from the Design Review Commission, and given that we are in the midst of considering hiring a consultant for, as a result of the request for qualifications that we sent out, the committee decided it was best, and also the issue of whether or not the Design Review Commission would not have enough members to meet. There's a member currently not assigned, and then there may soon be another vacancy. So as a result, we discussed this, and I did offer language to add, just to simply reduce the quorum number from a majority of the total committee, which would be 8 voting plus the mayor who's non-voting, which would constitute 5, down to establishing a quorum at a fixed number of 4 members, voting or non-voting. And then also adding the requirement that a majority of the voting members present at any meeting would be required to approve any action. So that's what we put on the table. I sent all this information out, I believe, on Monday, last Monday. I know I've been getting some, Mr. Salinas is dying to get up and speak. I know we've had some correspondence back and forth. Do you want to just tell what your suggested changes were? And then I'll kind of give you my input on it.
The language that you added about voting says it has to be a majority of voting members present at the meeting.
Right.
But if you look at the item right in front of O, 1434.03N, it says anyone with a personal interest or financial interest must abstain. And 3 of the members own property on Main Street. One of them's a contractor, and one of them's an architect. So I could see possibilities where, just to use real names, if the contractor, Eric, is working on a building owned by Patrick, they would both have to abstain. And if you have a quorum of either 3 or 4 voting members, which I agree with the quorum he came up with, and 2 abstain, then you cannot have a vote to okay the permit.
At that one meeting, because there's other members of the commission.
I'm saying.
But then
if
it gets
only-
delayed.
If only 3
Right.
or 4 voting members
Right.
were present at that meeting, you
Right.
cannot okay the permit.
It's almost like a
So-
double-edged sword.
Well,
though.
true, but
Yeah.
here was my response when you sent me that. It should never happen. I mean,
Anywhere.
if a client, let's call them, an applicant, who wants to do some work in the historic district, hires somebody who's on the design review commission, that should be openly known. And if the client hires 2 of them for some reason, and then they have their eyes wide open when they go to a commission meeting, that they may not get approval. And plus, I would argue, anybody on the design review commission should not be doing work that is in violation of the guidelines that they themselves would be fairly expert of.
Why do you keep saying in violation of the guidelines? We're not talking about anything that's in violation of the guidelines.
Well, anything that would cause, because look, if someone goes to the building department to make changes in the historic district, our engineer can approve a permit without going to the design review commission, so long as it meets all the guidelines. The hearing at the design review commission would be to see if there is some sort of exception. And I'm saying that a contractor or architect who's a member of the commission should be advising their client, this is a problem, and if you go before the commission, I won't be able to vote. But let me just cut to the chase here, though. The Ohio Revised Code says this about voting. It says the affirmative vote of a majority of the voting members present at a meeting at which the quorum is present, these are the 2 things we're talking about, shall be necessary for the authorization or taking any action voted upon by the members. We don't really have a choice. The Ohio Revised Code says if there's a meeting, if you have a quorum and there's a meeting, you have to have a majority of the voting members present, not the number that actually vote, because some may abstain. So we really don't have a choice.
According to Robert's rules, if the quorum is present, any vote is good.
Well, that's fine.
You are changing that with your language.
Well, first of all, Robert's Rules doesn't apply to Chapter 1434. Nowhere in that chapter does it define Robert's Rules as guidelines for how they do business.
We use it everywhere except right here in council, where your quorum and your voting rules are established.
Well, our voting rules are not the same as Robert's Rules.
I'm saying yours are established by law, but every other commission that I know of is using Robert's rules.
Well, but we're not defining that with regard to the Design Review Commission.
But you're contradicting it or changing it. Like I said, if you use Robert's rules and what they have always been doing, if the quorum is present, any vote is good. The majority of the votes cast determine the outcome. And that's the language I think you should be using instead of creating a situation where you may not be able to vote. You're trying to speed things up with simplifying the quorum, and then you're turning around and making it so they may not be able to vote even though they have a quorum.
Yeah, but you're talking about a very unique situation, one where there's half the number of members who could be present, and some of those members have to abstain. And that's, I'd ask Bob if it's ever happened like that, and my guess is the answer is no. So I don't know that we need, but,
Either Ted or Patrick can use Eric to do work on their building. That's perfectly
Well,
legitimate.
it is, but I'm not gonna repeat what I just said about that. With the propriety of them advising a client that, they should be doing work according to the guidelines. But how do you overcome state law that I just read that says you have to have a majority of the members present? How do we get around that? Robert's rule doesn't, trump state law.
I guess I've never seen whatever law you're talking about that says the majority of the members present have to pass anything. I've never seen
Yeah,
that.
or unless there's a stipulation that a higher level, like a 2/3 vote, needs to be,
That's for changing the laws or the rules.
this is the open meeting, this is the same code that, Mr. Semino provided when he weighed in on the quorum issue. He just didn't provide this section of it. It's 1702.22, subsection A2. And you can read it for yourself. But that's the law.
Why don't you read it to us?
Well, I just did. The affirmative vote of a majority of the voting members present at a meeting at which a quorum is present, as provided in Division A1, which just means that the voting members present establish a quorum, of this section shall be necessary for the authorization or taking of any action voted upon by its members. And then there's an exception is if there's a higher level required by code, like a 2/3 vote or something like that.
State law you're reading?
Ohio Revised Code 1702.22.
Mr. Karas, with the matter at hand here, I think the issue that we were trying to address is dealing with a smaller number of people being at the meeting, and with the establishment of a quorum at 4, I think that handles that issue, and the language about voting on what it needs to be to pass is clear and appropriate. I would recommend that we're okay to move forward with that.
I appreciate what you're saying, Larry, and I do think we need to consider points of views, and I understand where you're coming from, because the last thing you want is we're trying to carve out an exception or a situation where we can have a meeting, but then we have a meeting where a vote isn't possible. Again, I think that's a very unique situation, but I don't think we can overcome the state law that provides for how votes have to be taken.
Well, I hope if a
That's the
situation,
state law. I agree with what you're doing, although I would still change the wording. You've got wording in there about them issuing a zoning permit. They don't issue zoning permits. You might still take a look at your wording.
Okay.
I
We'll have the we'll have the law director go, I don't think I sent it to him, because I think he's been away, right?
Larry, and Cliff, what about, like, if a situation like this would ever come up, is what you were talking about, maybe the secretary, like, if they know ahead of time this is coming before you guys, instead of wasting anyone's time, maybe the secretary or Bob, somebody who's ever in charge of that committee, make a phone call to members and find out, hey, these members cannot vote. Are you or are you not gonna be here? Because, you know, if you're not gonna be here, then we're not gonna waste this person's time in coming, because we have to have, you know, a quorum here to vote, and these individuals, you know, I'm saying if this were to come up, you know, I don't know if that's ever been done or something to.
Yes, it has been. Julie, on a number of occasions, has called people to see if there was going to be a quorum present.
Unfortunately, if you're a member of a group, you really shouldn't have to be called.
I agree.
That's my thought.
I
If you're not going to be there, you should call in,
Right,
okay? The secretary shouldn't be having to call. Well, are you going to be there or not? Because I already told, that happened to me once. I told him, it's my anniversary. I'm not going to be at this meeting. And then she called and said, hey, we're not going to have a quorum. And I said, well, then you're going to have to talk to my wife. We're going somewhere for an anniversary, okay? And to tell you the truth, I took care of it. I came in and did that. But that's another thing about this group. When we go to a meeting there, half the time we don't know who's going to be there. And she doesn't either because they haven't called. We had members last year, in the last year, that have missed 3 and 4 meetings. Well, is so-and-so going to be there? Well, I didn't hear anything, you know. So, but anyway, yeah, I appreciate what you're saying too on it. It's just, it's run real kind of haphazard and loose, where it puts too much pressure on, number one, the secretary, who that isn't really even her job. Not her job. The secretary is only there to take minutes. Okay, so it's not her job to get a quorum there or call people, are you going to be here? If anything, that would be the person that runs the meeting, the chair. Or am I going to have a quorum there? But that never seems to happen, so if it's law, I guess.
No, that just goes back to communication.
Correct.
We'll circle back to the issue at hand. Rob, thanks for putting in the work on this. Is there any questions with the ordinance in front of us? And I think this question's still out for the law director, to your point. making
Yeah, the
sure that
language
everything-
can be tweaked.
Yeah,
if-
regarding that language at the end there, the 2 or 3 things listed there may be better covered by required to approve any
Yeah,
action by the commission. I'm not saying,
Yeah, that's fine.
it's a minor thing.
yeah, I agree, and
Okay.
that's certainly not, you know, substantive
Right.
to
Okay.
what we're talking about.
Well, and maybe he can help define in his language,
I'll send this to
the
him with the suggestion that we can
majority
just
of
shorten it.
voting members, maybe
Yeah.
we can define that as a number rather than, so that it's not subjective.
Well, it would be 3.
Well,
If
the
you have,
quorum,
in this situation, there would be 4 members voting or non-voting. If there are only 3 that were voting, then actually the would only require 2 votes. If the 4 people were voting members, then it would be 3. Oh, what, 2 or 3, right?
well, and in my opinion, if 2 have to abstain, then it's
Well,
up to the other 2 to make
again-
a decision and you issue the permit.
Yeah,
If it's not important enough for the rest of the members to be there, then if you have a quorum and the majority of vote is done, you go with that decision.
I don't necessarily disagree, other than state law doesn't provide for that exclusion. There is an emergency clause. I put that in there because I think Mr. Hawksley is leaving soon,
End of the month, end of next month,
end of December.
yes.
So that's why there's an emergency clause in there.
Is there any other questions from council on this item? Hearing none, what's the pleasure of the committee?
ordinance.
Any Next item on the agenda is an ordinance adopting the Anti-Displacement and Relocation Assistance Plan. This is sponsored by Community and Economic Development. Ms. Wood?
Yes, this is just in addition to the RPIG grant required by the state of Ohio. Some of our other CDBG grants, it's part of the actual grant agreement. They wanted an anti-displacement policy in addition to, and really it's irrelevant considering that we're not going to displace any residential properties with the water tank. So.
Is there any questions on this item? And safe to assume yes to the emergency clause?
Yes.
If there's no questions, what's the pleasure of the committee?
Ordinance.
Number 8 on the agenda is an ordinance to renew the contract for Dennis West as the Economic Development Director. This is sponsored by Personnel. Mr. Calvi, would you like me to ask the mayor to talk about this? Or would
Yes,
you like to
please.
take it? Mayor, would you?
Yes, we were still working on this morning with Mr. West. I think you all received copies of the contract, and I know you may not have had time to look at it. We'd like to approve this at the December meeting. He has concerns. He needs to know whether he's going to be employed or not, which I've told him that he's done a great job with this, and there's no question about that. I have talked to one township person, and they told me the other night when they were working on one other project, they had another discussion afterwards that was very positive about the work that Dennis had done and the contacts that he's done with them. And they told me that he told me that they would be in for the 15,000. But we don't have the MOU on this, and but I believe we need the MOU, something in writing that they're committed to the 15,000. And I'll be working on that tomorrow. I did try to call Mr. Coya today, but the call rolled over into voicemail. But I want to confirm with all three of them that's where they're at.
So the $10,000 increase from the last contract, that would be fully on the city's dime?
No, 15,000 would be paid.
Right, the township committed 15,000 on the
Yes.
last contract,
Yeah.
and we did 65, and that was an $80,000 contract.
Yeah,
The new
No.
contract is 90,000.
yes.
But, no,
So
there's a
where would
missing
the-
piece. There was a community involvement, some business people, I don't even know how to define them,
Yeah.
were contributing, I believe, 15,000 a year.
More like 30,
A year?
yes.
And are they still
Oh,
doing that?
No, this,
No.
this,
That was a 3-year commitment, and it ends here.
right, so our commitment would be covering the extra 10,000 and
So
the
we're
other-
increasing from 65 to,
Well, keep in mind. that
we were at
we've
50
We've provided a lot of the provisions also that
Yeah.
you need to run an office.
Yeah, we have
Yeah.
office
Yeah,
expenses
we
too.
had about I believe somewhere around $106,000.
so
work
I
with.
guess my question, because Dennis is doing a fantastic job, and I guess my question with that is, for the 15,000 that the township is contributing, should we be looking at bringing Dennis on as a city instead of a consulting?
He wants to be a consultant.
Is the township willing to
No,
give any more?
I gave you
But-
your answer.
I'm leaning where you're going. And by the way, it was, you remember discussions about this before we ever hired somebody. I had strong concerns that this should be an employee. And if you don't know, on council, we had an employee who was an economic development director. So there's history for
Yes.
that. This was supposed to be a joint venture. And I think that's one of the reasons that made it complicated to make it an employee. But my preference has always been for something like this to have the person be an employee. But I get and, you know, I get that
You're gonna
we
make a
move
lot more
forward.
money.
Well,
I
true,
get the partnership, I just don't.
but the partnership's breaking down because we're
Right.
shouldering.
We're shouldering the majority of it, and I feel like the focus is evenly spread, and that's fine, it is Ravenna community, but I just feel like maybe that, somehow that could be evened out a little bit better, or,
Yeah. My perspective isn't necessarily that, although I would love to see the township put more money in it. I don't think that's a realistic possibility.
No.
But we've gone from supporting it from at least 63% to 83%. What percentage is it our job, you know, our thing to own? So I do worry about that. No question about the value of Dennis.
his value is impeccable, I mean, he's
Yeah.
doing fantastic.
Yeah, I don't know that I have any concerns about that, but the math and how this thing was put together initially, I had concerns, and I think it's sort of like heading in a weird direction.
I think what I was looking at is, and I had concerns about the township commitment, and I'm assuming that they're going to come in with the 15,000. We're focused on things that we can control on our end. So the contract in front of us and the time frame for this is 1 year, correct?
Yes.
So, I mean, if that is a conversation, I don't know if it's an ongoing one, if there's more time that you start, you know, January, and see if Dennis is, you know, amenable to coming on as an employee in 2024. I'm not too sure, but that could be an ongoing, I think at this point, what you're saying is that his value is there, and I agree. I don't want to pass this up for anything, so I want to, what we can control is what's in front of us, and approving the contract that's here, that's what I would recommend with what's in front of us. I have questions for logistics for Dennis, I think, in terms of the goals, if you will, at the last page, but that can be handled or have a conversation outside of this. I think the conversation, though, and approving the contract as is, I'm in favor of, but I
Yeah,
agree.
no,
I'm
not saying I'm not in
And
favor of it. I'm saying I want to know where this is
I'm questioning
going.
the
Yeah.
numbers,
Yeah, I
I'm
hear
looking
you.
at what we've had in the
I dealt
splits.
with the numbers all day today.
And the only other thing that I had to say in looking this over is again on the deliverables. And I feel like there's one organization that's named here a lot to partner with. And I really feel like we have a community and economic development corporation that has been on our main street for decades. And I would really like to see more work done with them and more collaboration done with them as well. And I would like to see that added into the deliverables.
Yeah, I've always had concerns about the deliverables, only because we started with very specific things, creating databases and all this other stuff, and now we've kind of softened the language, which I almost prefer, because I think it was a heavy lift to produce all these deliverables. But the one thing that struck out to me, and this is just an editorial comment, it says on his deliverables for 2020 to complete a CRA for the city of Ravenna. And we've talked about a CRA ever since I started on this, and we just can't, and I know there's no way Dennis could do something like that on his own, which
No.
I thought was a very odd thing to put on his shoulders. But I do think we need to start talking about a CRA again, because we keep, it's approach avoidance. We talk about it, we draft plans sometimes, and then we just walk away and don't get anything done. But I agree with you. But I just want to know where we're headed, because I think we're just kind of playing with this football, and it's going back and forth, and I don't know that we have a clear plan of what this is and what the city's role is.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
Well, I mean, we started out as a community thing where we were all pitching in, and now everyone's leaving but us, you know,
Well,
financially.
there was a point when we were trying to put this together, until there was a change in personnel on the committee, that we were gonna be doing this alone.
Yeah.
And it's not a bad thing to do it alone, because then we have more focus and more ability.
I would recommend you move this on, and then you need to talk to me privately about that stuff. Some of this stuff should have been in executive session.
Well, unfortunately, one of the disadvantages of not having him as an employee is I don't think we
Right,
can.
As a consultant, it can't go executive session because it's. not
Wait a
personnel.
second. I wouldn't go as far to say that right now.
Well, you might get an opinion on it, but I'm pretty sure independent contractors are not employees.
No, they aren't.
And
Nope.
the section that covers an executive session only says employees or elected officials.
Well, I think again, coming
I
back to,
would check.
I don't want to debate on the Roberts rules right now. We did that in the
That's
previous
state
item.
law.
Sunshine laws, yeah.
Sunshine, yeah, thank you. But if there is concerns or conversations to be had about this, I think a one-on-one with the mayor for each of council
It's appropriate.
to have, is
Yeah.
appropriate. So I think with what's in front of us, and assuming that the township is in at the $15,000 mark, and for at least 1 year of where we're at, that is the question.
Well, we know
I wouldn't
that.
assume on them, I would make sure they have a dedicated,
And that's where I was coming from. The things that we can control right now is moving this on our end, committing to Dennis in this contract, saying that this is something we approve. Now it's on the township to make the approval on their end, and hopefully they do.
And if they don't?
Then we come back to square one. I would lean on the mayor for a conversation with Dennis and how we can keep him, I think. But I'm hoping that to your point, if you've spoken to at least one or two or a handful in the township that they're committed, then I'm hoping that's true. And
I'll firm that up tomorrow because this isn't on our agenda. The MOU is not on the agenda. Chelsea does have it. It's fairly simplistic with that, but they have to have it signed by their lawyer and by all three of their people, and we have to have Frank and myself sign it on this side.
okay. Well, yeah, even more of a reason that the one-on-one conversation with you about the contract, which is separate from what is actually on the agenda, to your
Yeah.
point. Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay. So within your packet, that MOU is there with the numbers at least outlining. Which, will have to
Yeah, it was based
be
upon a
increased
different-
consultancy fee of $80,000 and monthly payments of $7,500, I think it was.
Well, the
Something like that.
breakdown is on there too, which would be different.
True. So by the next meeting, we'll have all that
Yeah.
information.
Well, the next meeting, you'll be wanting to vote on it.
Correct.
So, yes, we're
I have no problem voting on the contract. I mean, everything is contingent upon each other.
Mhm.
So I would, and look, I mean, we're talking about a person. I mean, you can call it contract, employee, whatever, and I think one of the concerns, we should always have is, sending a message, just like we did when we were talking about the fire and police chief. I think sending a message that we're gonna vote on it this month rather than delaying it is important.
So with this item, is there any other questions? And is everyone okay with the emergency clause at the next meeting? Go back to my agenda. Well, if there's no other questions, what's the pleasure of the committee?
Ordinance.
Ordinance.
All right. Is that everything on the agenda? All right, that's everything for committee of the whole. We will call to order. Do we have a formal motion to adjourn committee of the whole?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So I will call to order the special city council meeting of November 21st at 6:33 PM. Chelsea, would you read the roll? The call, excuse me.
You are hereby notified that a special meeting of the Ravenna City Council has been called for Monday, November 21st, 2022, immediately following the 6 PM Committee of the Whole meeting. The purpose of the meeting is to discuss and/or act upon ordinance 2022-117 to adopt the anti-displacement and relocation assistance plan.
All right. And would you call the roll?
Mr. Kelty,
Here?
Ms. West,
Here.
Mr. Moskin,
yes.
Ms. Michael,
Yes.
Mr. Karas,
Here.
Ms. Wood,
Here.
Mr. Harper.
Here.
All right, and again, one item on the agenda this evening, which is ordinance number 2022-117.
An ordinance adopting the anti-displacement and relocation assistance plan for CDBG-funded projects and commitment of funding for residential public infrastructure grant and declaring an emergency.
And this is sponsored by Community and Economic Development. Anything you want to add, Ms. Wood?
Nothing to add.
Is there any questions from council? Do we have a motion to waive the 3 separate readings?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Kelty?
Yes.
Ms. West?
Yes.
Mr. Moskin?
Yes.
Ms. Michael?
Yes.
Mr. Karas?
Yes.
Ms. Wood?
Yes.
Mr. Harper?
Yes.
And a motion to adopt the emergency clause?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Ms. West?
Yes.
Mr. Moskin?
Yes.
Ms. Michael?
Yes.
Mr. Karas?
Yes.
Ms. Wood?
Yes.
Mr. Harper?
Yes.
And then a motion to pass the ordinance?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Karas?
Yes.
Mr. Moskin?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Ms. West?
Yes.
Ms. Michael?
Yes.
Ms. Wood?
Yes.
Mr. Harper?
Yes.
All right, that ordinance is adopted. That's everything on the agenda. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.